Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Emily Harle. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings on in the charity world. This week we'll be talking about the mental health challenges faced by people holding charity leadership positions and offering some solutions to overcome them.
And we're going to focus on the situation for small charity leaders, at least to start with. The social enterprise Fair Collective recently surveyed some 350 small charity leaders in England about their mental health. And 85% of respondents said they had experienced poor mental health due to their role. 20% of those affected described the impact on their mental health as severe. Unsurprisingly, the research found that systemic and sector-wide issues, such as scarce funding, were major contributors to this concerning situation, as well as charities' more specific internal challenges. And leaders working in the children and young people, health and education spaces experienced the worst impact on their mental health. Against that gloomy backdrop, we're going to use the next 25 minutes or so to dig into why the situation is so dire for charity leaders and what can be done to address the situation at both personal and systemic levels. And we're delighted to be joined by Claire Goodwin-Fee, Chief Executive of Frontline 19, a community interest company that provides psychological support to NHS and frontline workers. And before founding Frontline 19, just as COVID was kicking off, she worked as a psychotherapist and counsellor. Hi, Claire.
Hello.
Now, looking at that research, small charity leaders are particularly pressured in their jobs because they often find themselves responsible for things that are covered by whole departments in larger organisations. Is that your experience as the founder of Small Charity Leader?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Vic and the Fair Collective and the work that she's doing because I think she's making more visible some of the big challenges to individuals. And a lot of people that perhaps have started smaller organisations and charities have done it from a passion project like myself. And it started off and obviously built momentum, and you find yourself in a position where you're having to be jack of all trades, master of none. And then on top of that, you can have feelings of kind of inadequacy about, some of the dire situations you're working with. What she's done is groundbreaking and is so needed. People need to have this conversation because there is so much pressure on charity leaders to find the solutions with a very small budget against a huge pressure of making sure that everything they do is the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. It's a huge amount of pressure, and I wasn't surprised by the data that came out of that survey.
And that is pretty telling that didn't even shock you.
No.
And as a charity leader, particularly a small charity leader, is there a stigma associated with talking about mental health? A sense that doing so is going to be letting the side down?
I think so, yes. I mean, particularly because you feel, I'm talking from my own personal point of view here, you feel quite isolated because you're the one that's leading the way forward. And you often don't have that person to talk to. I often feel very responsible for the team, for the people. I mean, I have a very small team, but for the people that we're looking after or trying to help in the NHS, I certainly don't want to burden them with how things are. So, the isolation of trying to figure things out, and for a long, long time, it would keep me awake at night. And I burnt out several times during COVID with the amount of pressure that I was under. I mean, my story is quite unusual. We went from being a very small enterprise that was going to help 40 or 50 people to helping over 1 million people over 5 years. That was never planned. And so trying to build the infrastructure around that had its own unique challenges. It's certainly been a massive learning curve, and it's not unusual. And I think the thing that surprises me is when you talk to people that have been in the industry for a long time, they are still struggling with the same things. I talk to people that I really admire that have got huge awards and have done amazing work out there. And yet when you talk to them, they still don't feel that they're good enough or that they've done enough work. And they feel that real sense of pressure to get things right and to change things dramatically.
I'd like to talk a little bit later about some of the ways of overcoming those feelings and better managing the often very challenging situation that small charity leaders in particular are faced with on a daily basis. I thought it was interesting what you said a little earlier about the passion project element. And often small charity leaders have lived experience of the issues that they are working to address. That can lead to problems of its own, can't it? Because this sort of sense of the need for tidy trauma, we want you to have the experience of your service users, which in many cases are traumatic, are very difficult to handle on a personal level.
Yeah.
But make sure that you don't make such a big deal of it that it interferes with the running of the charity.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a very common element to it. And I think that I've been part of an organisation called the Growth Project, where they get different charity leaders together and they also work with businesses to have a collaboration. It's not a mentorship, but kind of collaboration so that we can understand where each other are coming from. And it's really useful to find other people to talk to about this stuff, because I think that unless you're in that position, people don't really understand. They just see the glossy headlights and go, wow, it's amazing what you're doing and you must be so pleased. And I think, no, I've been awake at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering how we're going to pay the wages bill this month, or wondering about X, Y and Z, and is this going to pan out? It's a lot of pressure, and it is about this aspect of tidy trauma. And I remember watching other charitable leaders, and when they might fail at something, the harsh criticism can be incredibly destructive, because somehow they're supposed to get it right because they're in the charitable sector. Even for myself, back at the start of COVID, I had a huge amount of abuse online about what I was doing. I had death threats. There was all sorts of horrible things that happened. And people said, well, what do you expect? You've become visible. And I said, I wanted to just help people, not have people send me abusive emails or to contact me across social media and threaten to kill me. That's not okay. And yet it wasn't, you got the sense that it wasn't okay to talk about that, and that people, so I went back into therapy and dealt with it in that way. As I've kind of progressed in my journey, I'm very careful about what I do share and what I don't share. So I keep a part of myself back. And when I'm working, obviously I'm very involved in what I'm doing, but my personal life is very private.
That's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that you were faced with that, because I think a lot of people would be very surprised to hear that somebody setting up an organisation that fundamentally wants to do good should get that backlash and that vitriol.
The funny thing is, and it's not, I mean, I'm saying it's funny, it's not unusual. It's like the tall poppy syndrome. As soon as you poke your head up and you start to challenge things and say, look, this isn't okay, you do get people that do that. And I'm not alone in, and mine might be quite an extreme version because of maybe the times or the situation I was in, I don't know. But it's unfortunately, it's not unusual, and the amount of abuse that people get, but people don't talk about it. People don't talk about the horrible emails they get, or some of the funders that want to play power games with you that kind of really want you to be very grovelly. And don't get me wrong, I'm always incredibly grateful for anybody that supports us in the work that we do. But some people have a different agenda to you, and sometimes that's really tricky to navigate. And even with my background of kind of psychological well-being and understanding psychology, it could be really tricky.
And do you think that part of it was amplified then by that exponential growth that you had and you experienced? Have you seen that happening elsewhere within the sector with other leaders?
Probably not. I mean, as far as I know, not at the rate that I had it, but we literally went from 0 to 750 people that we were helping within a day. Yeah. And then in a week we ended up with, at the start, 20,000 people came in and asked for support. Within 6 weeks of starting what I thought was going to be a small project, was on every TV channel across the UK, American television, all the news, but it was massive. And I was petrified, absolutely petrified, but I stuck within the work and kept going until about 18 months, 2 years in. I couldn't sleep properly. I felt very anxious a lot of the time. And I remember speaking to a private psychologist and saying, and she said, you need to stop. And I said, but I can't. She said, you need to stop. You are burnt out, you need to stop. And I thought I failed in some way, because everyone else seems to be coping with this, but they're not, they just don't talk about it. So now I'm very open about it and what my self-care looks like, and the fact that I do have therapy and I love it. I, trot off and go and have my hour a week, and I have that conversation and I offload stuff and I work through things, and I value my time within the work that I'm doing, but also I value my time outside of that with my kids and my family.
And I'm sure there's a lot of quiet appreciation of you being so open about that within the sector. But have you had anyone coming to you directly saying thank you for being so open about sharing this and talking about this and initiate that discussion?
Privately, I've had a couple of messages on LinkedIn where people have said, I wouldn't have had the strength to come out and speak about that. And I said, well, it's kind of the business I'm in. If I'm not going to talk about mental health, then perhaps I shouldn't be doing it. But I believe that everybody's got mental health, and it can be good and it can be bad, and you can have good and bad days. And the more we talk about this, I have amazing days and I think, wow, I'm so lucky to be doing what I'm doing. And then there are other days where I think, I really don't want to be doing this anymore. It's the ups and downs, that's just life. But whatever work you're doing, you're going to get that in. And I think we just have to be honest about it and have these conversations.
This whole conversation is very apt at the moment because we recently on Third Sector covered a report from the fundraising think tank Rouse. And that report looked at secondary trauma and how it affects fundraisers specifically. It found that secondary trauma affects fundraisers in a similar way to how it affects frontline staff. But
absolutely.
And one key difference that it did find was that fundraisers were comparing their trauma to that of the either beneficiaries or their frontline colleagues as well. And they invalidated their own struggles in the process. So there was a lot of interviewees that were spoken to for this study, and I think the report said almost all of them exhibited signs of that sort of invalidation of their own feelings in comparison to other people's, whether that was their beneficiaries or other staff who were working on the front lines. So with this in mind, how can charity leaders ensure that every staff member, including themselves, regardless of their role, is given space to process that secondary trauma that every staff member in a charity is exposed to in some form?
I think it's tricky. If somebody takes something away from today, the one thing I'd love for them to take away today is that trauma is not like pie. Unfortunately, there's enough for everybody to have. And it's not like, well, you did that, so therefore you've had more trauma than me. That's not how that works. It's about our own experience of different circumstances, and that's key. Because what we tend to do is if you invalidate your own experience of that traumatic event or whatever ongoing trauma you've had, you shut the lid down and it festers in the corner. At some point it will come through, whether it's now, next week or in a year's time, that trauma will appear and cause damage. So, number one, validate your own experience of what you've had happen to you or you've been around, and don't compare it to other people's, because that's so unhelpful. It's a bit like saying, I've got a poor foot, yeah, but mine's worse than yours. Actually, let's not do that. That's not what this is about. And secondly, I think it's about having these open conversations. So I have a very small team, but I'm very mindful of having healthy boundaries with them. So if it's the weekend, there may be something that happens that has to be addressed at the weekend, but I know that they will only contact me if it's an absolute emergency and vice versa. But having weekly just chats and getting together. I mean, we work virtually and there's 4 of us up and down the country, but we get together virtually and we sit and just chat, how are you doing? What's happening with you? And also just giving that space to say, look, this could be something that you look out for, and just talking about it. Now, some people are very comfortable saying, yes, I am struggling, and they want you to help them. And then other people don't want to have that conversation. They feel like it's work and they want it to be separate. So again, I always make sure that people know what resources are out there for them to make contact with. But it's just about having that open door policy to have those conversations and just being mindful that it's a natural phenomena. If you're a marathon runner and you're running and then 7 years after you started your career as a marathon runner, you've got a hip problem, people would say, well, that's quite normal. If you're working within trauma or heavy distressed population, at some point that trauma is going to affect you in some way, shape or form. It's a very natural phenomena, and we have to accept that and make appropriate things to cope with that and manage it.
And thinking about some of these systemic challenges facing the sector and people trying to keep going in the face of these challenges, do you have any thoughts on how the charity sector as a whole can be working collectively to try and overcome some of those challenges?
It's about coming together, really. All of us are struggling with funding. I've watched several of our contemporaries and peers shutting down, and it's been tragic. I think it's about working together collaboratively to solve things, but also about having really open conversations about how difficult this work can be. Because I'm sure people think that charitable sector is lovely, you get to do hearts and flowers and you solve problems. No, it can be absolutely grueling hard work. 3 o'clock in the morning packing orders to go out of your merchandise shop because there's no one else to do it, and getting up for the school run at 6 o'clock in the morning and carrying on. We've all done it, but it's about just being honest around things and I think just trying to help each other out. And I think it's just about, not being isolated with things and having those conversations.
Yeah, and it's a very common complaint, I think, among small charity leaders in particular, who are working so many hours a day, a lot of the time at their kitchen table. They don't really have the time to be getting up and going to events where they can meet other people who are experiencing the same things. Do you have any thoughts on how charity leaders individually can work to build a community of people around them?
So people like Vicky, who does the Fair Collective, I've done some of her short courses. She's very good at bringing people together. There are groups on social media with other charity leaders that you can connect with. There's the Growth Project. I think it's about finding the other people that are having very similar situations to you, and it is such a relief when someone goes, oh my gosh, yeah, I really struggle with that too, and you go, oh, it's not just me. And people that say, yeah, I originally started off for this and actually ended up trying to work out finances and doing a pitch, and then you think, in the early days people talk about things and I think, what the hell is that? I don't know what that is. I'd have to go and Google it while I was in the middle of a meeting. Going from sitting in a spare room working to kind of dealing with massive advertising agencies doing global campaigns, and these are all things that people have to deal with, and I had no idea what I was doing half the time. But I think it's about just being open about it. The people that do our campaigns for us pro bono, they're called Adam and Eve, and they're an advertising company. And I remember them phoning me up one day and saying, we've won this award, it's called a Black Pencil Award. And I went, that's great. And them saying, you don't know what that is, do you? I said, I have no idea. And then it explained it's like the biggest advertising award in the world. And I just sat there and I thought, how have this become my world where this is like a normal thing? And it's like, well, then what do you do? I just carried on, and then later on went down Aldi's and did my food shop. You have to roll with it and kind of, I stay humble, but I think it's about talking to other people about how odd some of the situations are, because they can be incredibly odd.
And how do you make time in your day to be having those conversations and those comparisons with other small charity leaders? Because a lot of people would probably put that self-care, professional and personal, at the bottom of their to-do lists. How do you make sure that it doesn't fall off the edge?
It's hard. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's easy. For me, exercise really helps. I've got into that in the last year. Exercising, keeping my mind and body healthy really helps me. But it might be a case of communicating with a couple of friends on WhatsApp, or saying, come on, let's meet in town. I'm in a meeting at such and such, and have you got an hour for a quick coffee? And just trying to make it work, really, and getting outside the house. And if you can't, the other thing that I think is really useful is, I did a talk recently called Pink Sofa Thinking, which is where I came up with the idea of Frontline 19, sitting on my pink sofa in the front room, but that's where I do my work. But that's also where I watch telly. So I was like, this isn't going to work. So I shifted to the other end of the sofa. So again, it's about doing the little things that you can. Don't sit where you relax. If you haven't got the space, if you're going to sit at the kitchen table, do that, but don't sit in the normal spot that you're in, because psychologically, the next time you're sitting there eating your stir fry, you're going to be thinking about this email you should have sent, or this or that. And so I think there's little things you can do to break it, but I think you have to be mindful to reach out and check in with yourself. I know that when I am feeling quite low or tired, they are the times to go, right, okay, I need an hour to have a cup of tea, even if it's on a Zoom with somebody. Face-to-face is much nicer, but, if it's going to be something I can squeeze in, then a Zoom works as well.
And you mentioned that a couple of years ago you did suffer from burnout. Would you mind telling me how you recovered from that?
It got to the point where I used to wake up in the morning and I had the feeling of sheer dread. And I was absolutely exhausted no matter how much sleep I'd had. And then I started to think to myself, something's not right with me. But I laugh about it now, because I thought, well, it must be something physical. It couldn't possibly be anything mental. Of course not. And then I started looking and I thought, you've got burnout. You need to get some help with this. And I was mindful of not sharing that with the team at that point, because I didn't want to worry them. And I didn't want to kind of destabilise, because obviously they're looking to me to hold things for them. I thought to myself, right, I need some space for me to work through this. I also looked at the amount of hours that I was working at that point. I must have been working 19 hours a day easily, because the need was there. I thought to myself, right, first of all, you need to come off of your phone and not go on that first thing in the morning. You need to actually enter the day properly. And I remember my kids saying to me, Mummy, you're always working. Are you working again? I'm like, yeah, that's what I do. And they're like, but you're always doing it. And I thought, I'm missing my kids growing up here, and that's not okay. And I remember a story, and I'm sure other people have heard this, about a little boy on the beach, and there's all of the starfish across the beach, and he's picking them up and he's chucking them back into the sea. And this guy walks past and said, why are you bothering? There's like thousands there. And he's like, well, for that one starfish, it makes a massive difference. And I think that's the mentality I have now. I cannot fix everybody. I'd love to, but I can't. But what I can do is provide, if I can do it for 1, 2, 3 people, that's enough. And so that pressure on myself to fix all of the issues and get everything done within that day has lessened. So I think it's about realistic expectations. It's about looking after myself and having that balance between work and home. I also had therapy to help me have that space to offload and work through it. Bit by bit, I started adding in other pieces for me that were self-care. But there were some points where I just thought, I don't think I really want to be here anymore. And I never really spoke about that. I don't think I've ever actually properly said that out loud outside of therapy. But I didn't want to continue with what I was doing because I couldn't walk away from it. I had thousands of people relying on me to make this stuff work. But then I didn't want to stay and do it either because I was exhausted. And I think we went away on holiday to Greece, and I remember hanging out the window of this place we were staying in, halfway up a mountain, trying to get a signal on my phone, absolutely freaking out. I thought, what are you doing? You're on holiday. Why are you doing this? And I thought, no, put your phone away. And I said to the team, I need to take a couple of days off. And when I thought about it, I hadn't had a day off for probably 2.5 years. And so now I'll take time off, even if I'm going to sit and read and do something else, but it will just not be work.
So if anybody is listening to this and thinking, I'm in that place that you were then, perhaps not literally hanging out of a window up a mountain in Greece, but the equivalent, what would your recommendations be to them at this stage? You mentioned getting off your phone.
Yeah.
You mentioned being able to see the bigger picture, but yeah, any sort of practical pointers on how people can do that?
I think recognise that you're not alone, because you're not. That's number one, because I think that's the biggest thing, is the shame of somehow you failed because you're in that situation. Not at all. I mean, even with all my psychological training, 20 years I've been a therapist, you'd think, well, she must have known that. No, because I didn't think about it. When it's yourself, you have to really focus in on being mindful about where you're at. So you're not alone. I think number two, slow it down. Take some time out to work out where you're at and talk to people, whether it's a partner, whether it's a friend. I've got some amazing friends around me. My best friend, Lizzie, all the time we have conversations. She's like, what's happening with you? And we talk about things, but also poke your head outside of the charitable sector. Don't just stay within that 24/7, because you can get quite a warped view of the world. So I think that if you get to the point where you feel that it is significant enough, you can go to your GP, ask for support, or go and have some counselling or some therapy. There are lots of organisations that do free therapy. Obviously, if you can afford it, there's private therapy too. You can go to the Counselling Directory and get a list of therapists there. But I think the biggest thing is, don't sit in silence and suffer, because there is so much support out there, whether it's official, whether it's unofficial. Get out in nature. I walk with my dogs every single day. Even today when it's raining, I'll get up first thing in the morning and get out. I've got a little treadmill at home that I use, and I'll often be there first thing in the morning answering emails on the treadmill, because I need that exercise to get rid of the stress that I sometimes hold. So find the things that work for you, but have a gentle routine so that you're not opening your eyes first thing in the morning, because the pressure to flick open your emails and go, okay, what's waiting for me today is huge, because you feel that pressure on you. But you know what? It's not up to you to carry the whole of the organisation. We feel like it is, but it's not. You have other people there, and also it's okay not to get everything right all the time. I've made hideous mistakes in the past, but you've just got to learn from them and move on.
So it is partially about giving yourself that grace as well then.
Massively. I think one of the common things that talking to other charity leaders is that we are so hard on ourselves, that perfectionism, and not being able to take compliments about someone saying, you've done a great job. I cringe when people say that to me. I really struggle with it. And people say, oh, you've helped 1 million people. And I go, yeah, but it was our volunteers. They're like, but you pushed through with it. And my mum will always go to me, but you were the one that were doing 18 hours a day, Claire. But I'm getting better at going, thank you. I did that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Are there any other practical suggestions that you can provide for people working from home all the time? You've mentioned a few. Are there any other hacks, for want of a better word?
Don't forget to drink. Don't forget to eat. We can get so sucked into our computers. So, if you've got to set an alarm on your phone to remind you of a cup of tea, do that. And also give yourself a lunch hour. At the very start, I was hideous at doing that. I'd be like, I'll just eat as I'm doing this email. Now I'll move my computer and I'll sit and I'll eat. And if you look out the window, just do something different. Your brain is only good for 45 minutes. The blood flow to the prefrontal cortex at the front of your brain, it's only good for 45 minutes. So after that, you need a break anyway. Get up, move around, go to the loo, go and get a glass of water. That's a really good tip. And the other thing is, even if you don't have your own office at home, the space that you use to work in, change it up, get yourself a backdrop. So that when you finish, I've got one, when I finish at work at the end of the day, I fold it up, it gets packed away, I put it in my little case and away it goes. Because then your space is different. Sit in a different place that you normally do, as I said earlier. If you're going to sit at the kitchen table, sit somewhere else, or, move yourself around. Don't sit in your bedroom. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people were sitting in their bedroom working. Don't do that. Do it in such a way that you're mentally in a different place. I make sure that I get washed and dressed for office work, because again, it helps me to be in that mental space. And when I'm finished, I'll normally change out into my workout gear or something different. So I think it's again about having those little pockets and little compartments where you can actually have places that work for you and not against you. And then at the end of the day, have an ending routine. So at the end of the day, I normally take one of the dogs out. As I walk out the door, it's like my trip home, and I'll walk for maybe half an hour. When I come back in again, it's like returning home. So you've got that physical and mental break from being at your work day. And whether you have a shower, whether you do exercise, whatever it is you do, put something in to give that hard stop at the end of the day.
There's some really good advice in there, particularly when the line between work and home has gotten so blurred since the pandemic, since everyone started working remotely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things in here that I'm going to take away from my work from home days.
Good.
Yeah, I want a backdrop.
And you know, none of these things have to be expensive, because I know we're all working on a budget, right? And I also think that with your phones, I don't have any notifications on my phone. So I'm very mindful about when I go in to check them. And again, if the email arrives and it's really urgent, you're still in charge of when you respond to that. Some things, yes, of course, you're going to have to respond to very quickly, but other things, it's okay to do it on your agenda rather than someone else's. So again, it's about boundaries are about how we work with people and how we can gently push things back out again. And I think it's just really important to work with that. It's never too late, even if you've been working at home for 5, 6, 7 years, or you've been a charity leader for that amount of time. It's never too late to go, okay, let me take an hour out and work out what I'm going to do. Get yourself a massive big piece of paper and brain dump on there all the things that you're struggling with, and then cherry pick maybe 5 things out of there and give yourself little ideas about how you're going to make it work. And if you don't know how to make it work, go online, Google it, go and seek out other charity leaders on Facebook groups or similar, or LinkedIn, and ask on LinkedIn, you know, I'm struggling with this, what have you done to solve that? That way you get to connect with other people, you're not feeling alone, and you also might find a really good solution.
Do you think there's a different approach to how men and women tackle some of these issues? Because I know that statistically men, and this is a generalisation, but statistically men find it harder to open up and talk about challenges, and specifically with a peer group. Do you have any thoughts on that, and any sort of specific tips to help the men who might be less comfortable talking about their problems?
I think people have different challenges, and I think for men it's this whole thing about being the provider and this toxic masculinity, and as much as the world is working on eroding that, it is still quite a big issue about expecting men to be the providers and to do X, Y and Z. And I'd say there's no difference between the level of stress that you're under, whether you know you're a male or female or otherwise. And I think it's about whoever you are, however you are moving in the world, there are going to be pressures on you, and as a human being you're going to need support with that. And I think that support is about reaching out to other people and asking them what they did to make it work, or just sharing, I'm struggling with this, and you can do it in your own way. You've not got to be crying on the phone if that's not your thing, but I do think it is about saying, right, I'm finding this difficult. But yeah, men generally, I mean, the work that we do with the NHS, 87% of the people that we look after are female, 13% are male. Where's the rest of the men? Because they're there, but they're just not talking about it. They won't want to acknowledge it, and it's very toxic. And I would say it'd be interesting. I don't know what the breakdown is for Fair Collective and their survey, but I'd love to know what the breakdown is between the different genders about who can verbalise how difficult things are. But I'd say there's no difference in terms of any particular gender being able to manage this any better than others. I think there are different pressures on people, but as a human being, don't struggle alone.
That's a great message to end it on. Claire, thank you so much for your openness and for all of these really fantastic practical tips.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Claire, and that's it for this episode. We'll be back again next week to hear how the Blue Cross has managed a recent restructure. But for now, from Emily and me and everyone at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Jude Owen.